This episode of Wheat Pete's Word is brought to you by Syngenta. Growing wheat in Western Canada, Miravis Era fungicide for Fusarium combines two active ingredients and sets a higher standard for disease protection. And with Miravis Era, you're also getting excellent control of late-season leaf diseases. Visit syngenta.ca for more information.
Good day, and welcome to Wheat Pete's Word here on Real Agriculture for Wednesday, July the 16th. On this episode of The Word, we've got weather, we've got wheat, and we've got warnings. Let's go! Yes! Dang, it is hot, it is dry, the corn is starting to tassel, and that's right in the critical period. We do not want drought stress right now. Meanwhile, Donald and Udney saying they are catching just enough showers to make things really work, some of the best corn ever. And there's always these pop-up thunderstorms. So my brother-in-law, Mark, lucky farmer that he and his sons are, they caught 8/10 or 20 millimeters of rain just from a pop-up thunderstorm. Things are looking good there. But what's really interesting as you drive around the countryside is that some corn still looks amazing even with rain. And soybeans, by the way, soybeans are also starting to wilt in the field in these droughtier areas on droughtier soils. But my good friend Eric, chatting with him, and he said, Peter, you can never pay too much for good land, and you almost always pay too much for poor land. And it really drives home the point that land with good moisture holding capability, we haven't totally run out of moisture. We're not Western Canada. We're not into the Palliser Triangle where the grass is burned right off. But even walking my own soybean field, it's incredibly interesting. That field has been a bit challenging for me, and there's areas where the soybeans are wilting, just wilting. There are areas where the soybeans are well above my knee and still holding in there super well. So Johnson needs to take his shovel and go out to those areas that are wilting and figure out if there's any soil management that I can do to fix that. And so everybody go out there. If you're seeing those situations, gosh, dig, try to figure out, because it's just going to hammer us where those crops are suffering like that. And I don't know, it's the typical story. We are in a dry weather pattern, so an 80% chance of 10 millimeters of rain means somewhere between 8 drops and 10 drops on your windshield. It just, for those of us that are dry, it just seems to be staying dry. By the way, we're not nearly as bad off quite yet, I don't think, as the UK, where they are harvesting wheat 3 weeks early. Had some very, very disappointing yields there in that 80 to 100 bushel per acre range. They're normally at 160 plus. And 3 weeks early, that's all grain fill, or a lot of it is grain fill, and just how incredibly important grain fill is. Okay, just before I get into the wheat crop, a few cool things. Paul reminding me to tell growers, please be respectful on the road. I've been fairly impressed. I'm seeing a lot of wagons on the road, and for the most part, those wagons have good lights and safety chains. So awesome, keep it up. Anybody on the road that doesn't have good lights, safety chains, and an SMV sign, for goodness sakes, quit going on the road. But nice to see that. Still, we're wide equipment, we're moving down, and Paul's comment is we don't like these small vehicles that whistle around us going up hills and whatnot, but we need to be respectful as well. An excellent message, Paul. Really appreciate that. And here's your chuckle for the day. So we had a great discussion, a few of us on Twitter, and they started with this: Old enough. I'm old enough to remember. I'm old enough to remember. And so Johnson chimes in and says, well, if we're going to get into a contest about who's old enough to remember, I think I'm older than almost everybody, but not everybody. There are still older people out there. And Sean Schill just had to come back with, oh, Pete, you're still spry. If that doesn't say old, I don't know what does. Thank you so much, Sean. Pete is old. All right, I want to touch briefly about the smoke situation because I'm getting quite a few questions. We've had it for a few years now. The real question is it a benefit? Is it a harm? Well, there's always particulate matter in the smoke that is not good, particularly for human health, probably not good for crops either. But it's hot and it's dry. And so if that haze of smoke in the air can drop the temperature, as we talked about, I think, last week, drop that temperature so that the demand is less, then the smoke can actually be a benefit. However, corn is at the critical phase from 10 days prior to tassel to 10 days after. Basically, that 3-week period is the most critical time for the corn crop. To get the biggest possible yields, you need that corn crop to be photosynthesizing at maximum capacity. If the smoke reduces the photosynthetically active radiation, then it's going to reduce yield potential. Now, it's not going to be huge, and the dry weather is likely worse, but smoke can be a double-edged sword. A few years back for wheat, it was a win because wheat hates high temperatures, and the smoke actually reduced the temperature, lengthened the grain fill, and it was a win. For corn, the temperatures we're having really are not above what corn likes. It up to 32 Celsius, it's okay. So reducing photosynthetically active radiation probably is not a good thing where the corn is not under drought stress. All right, I want to move on. An agronomist called in and said, Pete, I got to stay anonymous on this one, but you really need to talk about it. And 100% their comment was, vertical tillage is not a weed control tool. We talk about tillage all the time as a weed control tool, but you have to actually pull the roots out of the ground, get those weeds when they're small, and vertical tillage just doesn't do that. The caller's comment was, man, I'm walking all these fields, and the herbicides have worked amazingly well. There are no annual weeds, no ragweed, no pigweed, no lamb's quarters. Like, gosh, life is good. And then there's all this doggone winter annual and perennial weed pressure, shepherd's purse, fleabane, Canada thistle, sow thistle, and all of that was there when the vertical tillage was done, and it simply did not kill those weeds. We have a very similar situation in a field where there were lamb's quarters, and we went through with tillage, and we did not take out the existing lamb's quarters, and so now we walk through and we have all these 18-inch tall lamb's quarters where we've done a pretty good job on controlling the newly emerging weeds, but those big ones are escapes. And I don't know, in those situations, it's an edible bean field. It really looks like we need to, if we're going to do minimum tillage, we need to go through with glyphosate as well to take out those big weeds, because we are not going to get control of them now, that's for sure. All right, a thought process for you. I'm going to move on, talk about wheat, and more wheat, because we have some big wheat yields out there. Lots of reports of strong yields. I like that. Above average. And one comment, better every year. Now, how can you argue with that? That's just awesome. It's not all roses, sunshine and unicorns, I guess. It's not all sunshine and unicorns. Brad's saying his wheat is running 95 to 106. And so his average wheat yields are just over 100, his 10-year average. So it's looking like a slightly better yield than average, but it's not incredibly better. Meanwhile, other growers, I mean, gosh, if you're going to go to the coffee shop, if it isn't over 120 bushels per acre, you probably should not go to the coffee shop. Rick saying that he has excellent wheat, But guess what? He didn't get it all combined, and he combined some after the rainstorm. Still made a grade 2, but barely, and it was lighter test weight after the rain. So I raised the alarm bells on test weight, and I've had lots of callers and text messages, Twitter, where it's like, Pete, like it's supposed to be low test weight. Man, we've got awesome test weight. So that's great. I'm glad if you have awesome test weight. Ben saying, yeah, just over 360. We're okay, but we're just over 360 grams per half liter. So there is test weight concerns out there, and if I raised the alarm bells and got you to the wheat field faster, I'm a happy camper, because nothing good happens to wheat after 30% moisture. And if you have excellent test weight, well, that's even better. Win for you. Here's a few other notes on the wheat crop. Lots of small kernels. And growers saying, wow, if only we could have gotten some more moisture, some cooler temperatures. If those small kernels had been big kernels, we'd have had just record yields. And yes, the small kernels are 100% the heat through late grain fill. We are also, green straw is just a nightmare. Straw is tough. Well, part of that is the fungicides that we use. Fungicides add yield. In order to add yield, you have to have more green through grain fill, more alive leaf tissue, and that means greener straw, hopefully a longer grain fill period. Not everyone is seeing that yield advantage, but we are also in the stripe rust situations. Growers that did not control stripe rust, they're very, very disappointed. What I'm most interested, we had a field where we had heavy stripe rust pressure. We went in immediately, we stopped it, and in the bad areas, it was fairly disappointing in yield, kind of below 80 bushels per acre. But because we stopped it in the better areas where it hadn't yet progressed, that field averaged 111 bushels per acre. That's pretty solid wheat, even though we had to stop that stripe rust. A few other notes in the really droughty sands, some disappointments. The wheat burned in 60 bushel per acre wheat in those areas, so it's not good everywhere. And once again, we are learning some cool stuff. Chad saying, now this is winter barley, but he said, Pete, they ran out of starter. We know what happens when you run out of starter, you get less yield. The winter barley with starter fertilizer, 131 bushels per acre. The winter barley without starter fertilizer, 111 bushels per acre. Now this is on heavy clay soil, and we always see more phosphorus response on heavy clay soils than we do on the great silt loam soils that my good friend Rob has there at Staffa. Man, we do not see the same level of response there because we get better root growth. But nonetheless, that is pretty a significant response when we get 20 bushels. And before you say, wow, 131 bushel per acre winter barley, that's awesome. Remember, barley bushel weight is exactly 4/5 of wheat bushel weight. So that 131 bushel barley translates to 104 bushel winter wheat crop. So it's good, but it's not all that amazing. Hey, couple last quick notes on the winter wheat crop. There is massive straw out there. We talked last week about straw prices, but wow, Ben saying, I've got straw for 160 bushel wheat crop. I don't have grain for 160 bushel wheat crop. Yeah, even Wheat Pete with his 9500 John Deere combine. We've upgraded, by the way, from the 8700 white, the 9500 John Deere combine. There's enough straw, and it's just tough enough that we can only crawl along at about 2 or 2.2 miles an hour. Yeah, then we have combine problems. You just don't get much done in a day. But, yeah, big straw. That's kind of cool. And Ryan saying, Pete, 130 bushel per acre wheat, and we still have amazing red clover. I wish I could figure out that recipe, Ryan. Red clover is such a hit and miss, but on those Lambton clays, Ryan just seems to be able to make that happen, and that is really, really cool. Okay, we're going to shift gears and move into the warnings. Just Potato leafhopper in alfalfa. Ryan Benjamin's great agronomist in Lambton County that talks about the red clover as well. Same guy. Yes, he's seeing tremendous pressure of potato leafhopper in alfalfa. If you have newly seeded alfalfa, even if it's leafhopper resistant, you are going to have to control them in the first year. It takes a year for that leafhopper resistance to start to kick in. And get out there and scout. Remember that if you're just harvesting that and that new growth, that is when the alfalfa is most sensitive to the impacts of leafhopper. They're just like a mosquito. As they suck the juices out, when they pull that proboscis out of the alfalfa plant, they inject a proteinaceous compound that messes up with translocation in the plant. And everybody will look at that and say, oh, it's drought. And it's not drought because alfalfa is a deep-rooted plant. It's stunted and yellowed because of the leafhopper. So get out there and have a scout. If you have leafhopper-resistant alfalfa that is well established, it's past the establishment year, you should be okay. However, if you have alfalfa that is not leafhopper resistant, again, it's all by height of growth. I'll just mention a really cool trial that I saw in Michigan quite a while back before we had leafhopper resistance. But they compared the longevity of the stand where they controlled leafhopper on a scouting basis, where they did it just on a regular basis, did it whether they had it or not, and didn't do it. And man, where they controlled it when they needed to control it versus where they did not control it, the alfalfa stand after 4 years was strong and vibrant and growing super, just tremendous yields. Where they did not control it, there was almost no alfalfa left to harvest. So it's a big, big deal when you get it. And don't forget, leafhopper also affects edible beans. So we better get scouting for leafhopper and edible beans. So far, we haven't seen high numbers, but we better get out there. On the soybean aphid fronts, continue to see soybean aphids out there. My great agronomist, Adam, that works with me, he writes such good scouting reports, way better than I do. But soybean aphid numbers continue to creep up. So the heat, I think, is slowing down their rate of progression. It's just plenty hot for them. But the other reason I think they haven't exploded is that we have all this wheat crop in Ontario. And it's tremendously interesting because when you look at the yen data, I'm going to beat up on the Michigan growers right now. In Michigan, in wheat, the vast majority of growers will spray their wheat crop with Matador, called Warrior in Michigan. And they do it because it's just cheap, and why not? Well, it kills all the beneficials. In Ontario, almost nobody puts an insecticide on the wheat crop, so we have all those ladybugs, all those syrphid flies, all those damsel bugs. They're all moving into the soybean crop, and they're helping to keep those populations from exploding. So that's a cool thing, but they are continuing to increase. That increase often ramps up. So scout. You just can't get over that. On the white mold front, so we are going to put in the link for the prediction models for both tar spot and white mold. Unfortunately, they don't work as an app anymore. That's really unfortunate. But from a white mold perspective, wow. For most places in Ontario, and I have to be careful because there's some wet places as well, so you have to do yourself, put in your own location. But the white mold risk has dropped right off the tar spot risk, which was quite high all the way through June. The last week, 10 days, it's dropped to 7% risk, and the threshold is 40. So we've really reduced the risk. If you are looking at white mold applications in edible beans or in soybeans, unless you have a very, very high history of white mold pressure, chances are you can get away with one white mold fungicide application this year as opposed to 2. So that's just a thought process, but check it out. I think that's really an incredibly interesting tool to look at and at least give you a guideline, but know your own field the best. As well with tar spot, if you are in a marginal area, so you're far enough north that you had almost no tar spot show up until late September last year, if the tar spot risk continues to be that low, then you probably, it's like in 2021, we had a huge outbreak in tar spot. In 2022, I thought for sure I needed to spray tar spot on my farm at Lucan because in 2021, in late September, we found the odd lesion. 2022, super dry, low tar spot risk, no tar spot developed to speak of in 2022. 2023, totally different story again. But if you're in a high-risk area where we know we have lots of inoculum, even at low risk, it's hard not to control that disease because it's so devastating. But if you're in those marginal areas, you're far enough north, you're east of Toronto, it looks like you might get another year without having it explode. Although you still have to look at your farm on the app to know that for sure. Hey, one last quick thing. I am getting so tired of seeing dicamba drift onto soybeans. Man, I see it in so many fields, and it might be 2,4-D, but it just, if they are IP soybeans, I can almost always find a little bit of dicamba there. Whether it's this year that we're seeing a little bit more drift because it was so windy back when we were trying to spray that dicamba. We just have to continue to realize that dicamba drift on soybeans, IP soybeans, is an issue and something that we have to, as growers, continue to try to do a better job on. All right, I'm going to finish up here real quickly. 2 last points. Number 1, Chris Rowlands at Honeyland Labs says he's seeing far more manganese deficiency in his tissue samples than normal on both corn and on soybeans. This isn't really a surprise. Dry weather, manganese just gets less available. If you're not seeing manganese deficiency, I don't worry about it too much. I think it's just a factor of the year, and I doubt it limits yield, but it is something to pay attention to, particularly on manganese deficient soils. And last, Jamie asking a great question. Okay, Peter, manure in the summertime. We get less compaction. We want less compaction. But how much damage does it do if we're putting it on a pasture, if we're putting it on alfalfa? Because I saw some liquid layer manure applied onto a pasture field, and it just burnt the foliage right off basically to the ground. Well, of course, liquid layer manure would do that because it's got a lot of ammonia in it, and that ammonia is just like anhydrous. When you put anhydrous in the ground, you get some gas escape, it kills the corn leaves. Same thing's going to happen with liquid layer manure, and so it's very hot. If you did that with liquid dairy manure, you're not going to see nearly as much issue. If you're putting manure on a pasture, man, it can have tremendous benefits. My great brother Paisley at Terra, his neighbor bringing some manure into an old pasture, and the growth is like double or triple or quadruple. The impact is unbelievable. And Chris Brown has done great research on putting dairy manure, liquid dairy manure, on alfalfa after first cut, after second cut, and you do get much, much better growth. The value is there. However, Jamie, as you said, you only have about 3 days after you cut that alfalfa before you're going to do a lot of damage to the crown. So you basically have to cut that alfalfa. You know, we do the 1 day, get it off as haylage, and the next day you are out there with the liquid manure so that you don't do significant damage to the regrowth. If you wait a week, man, you are going to see your tire tracks all the way through to harvest. All right, and with that, that's it. That's all on behalf of the team here at Real Agriculture. That's Wheat Pete's Word for Wednesday, July the 16th. Hey, I'm jumping in the truck, driving to the field to go combine. Happy combining to everybody out there. I hope your combine does not break down. I hope the yields are good, and I hope you send me lots of feedback because Wheat Pete lives on feedback. Talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wheat Pete's Word, brought to you by Syngenta. Miravis Era fungicide sets a higher standard for Western cereal disease protection with 2 powerhouse active ingredients for fusarium head blight and late-season leaf diseases. Make this your golden era with Miravis Era and earn Western Partner Program rewards on qualifying purchases. Visit syngenta.ca/partner program to calculate your rewards today.